Beyond the Badge is brought to you by Jerry's Foods, Jerry's Hardware, and the Edina Crime Prevention Fund.
Welcome to Beyond the Badge, a program about the inner workings of the Edina Police Department. Thanks for joining us. I'm Officer Brian Hubbard. Hang up and drive. That's the message the Edina Police Department continues to send to the community as officers crack down on distracted drivers. In November, the police department hosted a forum on the topic of distracted driving at Edina High School. The event, the latest feature of a year-long initiative, was moderated by local meteorologist Belinda Jensen.
This distracted driving is considered the new DWI. When you take your eye off the road for even that split second, you're going to have a delayed reaction before you can react to what's happening in front of you on the roadway.
Other events planned for the school year include a driver experience course where teens will get behind the wheel and be asked to deal with distractions thrown at them by the course or an officer riding along. The bi-yearly mock crash is also planned before Edina's prom in the spring to remind students about the dangers of drinking and driving. For retired Edina Police Officer Mike Blood, November 16, 2000 began like any other morning. But then came a call that changed his life forever. An Edina bank was being robbed by a heavily armed assailant, and Blood was the first officer on the scene. 10 years after being shot and left for dead, Officer Blood sits down to talk about the shooting, his recovery, and how he was able to find the silver lining during a time of darkness. Edina 16's Marty Dahl has more.
That day God saved me.
It's a story that many in Edina won't soon forget.
I just remember that cold morning, how he was doing nothing but responding to a robbery, left there, shot multiple times with an assault weapon, left for dead, but the one that died, in fact, was a robber and not Officer Blood.
This November marked the 10th anniversary of the First Star Bank robbery and the day that Edina Police Officer Mike Blood nearly lost his life.
These very serious wounds took years to recover from.
On this fall day 10 years later, Officer Blood, along with 6 other Minnesota police officers and firefighters injured in the line of duty,
it's my honor to present this to you,
is honored by the Military Order of the Purple Heart.
I want to say thank you to all those folks that were involved, the folks that supported me during my recovery time.
A recovery that is still ongoing, even a decade after the shooting that rocked the community. On a cold November day much like this one, Edina Police Officer Michael Blood responded to a call of an armed bank robbery right here on France Avenue. It was here that Officer Blood began a fight for his life. November 16th, 2000 began like any other morning for Officer Mike Blood.
That morning I was going into work, the day shift, where I had been for a number of years.
Okay, can you stay on the line with me for just a moment?
But shortly after 10 a.m., a call came in that was very much out of the ordinary, even for the 25-year veteran of the force.
Cars taking information on a robbery in progress.
Our dispatcher came over the air and advised us that there was a bank robbery at the First Star Bank at 69th in France. I happened to be about 1.5 miles north of the bank.
Officer Blood, less than a month from retirement, was the first to arrive on the scene. 10 years later, the bank has changed names, but the memories remain the same.
I heard our dispatcher say he's going out the back door now. About 2 seconds later, the robber stood up from between a couple cars, about 15 feet from my squad. As I turned to look at him, he rotated up an assault rifle.
The bank robber, a former police cadet named David White, aimed at Officer Blood.
Shots fired.
He pulled the first round off immediately, and that round went through the passenger side window of my squad and struck me right in the hips by my gun.
The wounded officer realized that staying in his car meant certain death. In an attempt to escape, he was shot again, through the leg. As Officer Blood fell to the ground, he pinched a nerve in his shoulder, making it impossible for him to grab his gun.
I knew I couldn't run and I couldn't protect myself. And I saw the only option is to play dead, and that's what I did.
Officer Blood was shot twice more through the back.
Reporting shots fired at the location.
I listened on the radio as the event unfolded.
Edina Police Sergeant Scott Kuiper was one of many officers on patrol that morning.
LBM, no plates, chase, westbound, 6-6.
Sergeant Kuiper picked up pursuit. Another officer, now retired Billy Moyer, had already run into the suspect, but was left slightly injured and with a stalled squad car after the robber opened fire for a second time.
I happened to take the Valley View exit and come down to his getaway route from Officer Moyer at that point, and he ran right into me, and then I pursued him, and then he crashed, which I figured he would, and did, and I was more aggressive than he was, and a better shot too, and ended it.
With the help of Officer Jim Rigg, Kuiper took down the suspect in the residential area of 66th and Ridgeview. At the time, they had no idea of Officer Blood's condition.
Officer down. Copy, officer down. There is medics en route.
I was conscious, and the first one to get to me that day was that young officer on her first day by herself on the day shift.
That officer was Shelby Lane, now a member of the police department in Sartell, Minnesota. At the time, Lane had been on the force for only 8 months.
And Shelby ended up putting her fist in one of the holes in my back to help keep me from bleeding to death.
These two officers put their lives on the line today.
The news of the shooting shook the department and the community.
Officer Michael Blood was shot in the stomach and the leg. Tonight, Officer Blood is still in surgery and in critical condition.
Officer Blood spent 10 days in a drug-induced coma and the next 7 months in the hospital.
Initially, after the incident, there was a lot of, most of our concern and shock was quite frankly over Mike Blood's traumatic injuries. We didn't know if he was going to survive.
I ended up with 19 surgeries in all. There were over 50 bullet fragments taken out of my body trunk.
Today, Officer Blood considers himself lucky.
Remember, this story has a good ending. I'm up and about, I'm going fishing. I played golf yesterday, so life is going pretty well.
Since the shooting, he's seen his 2 children get married and recently welcomed his first granddaughter, Lily, into the world.
The leg that hurts and the hips that hurt and that kind of thing, you're reminded of that every time you move, but you don't think about it for long.
For Officer Blood, recovery will continue to be an ongoing battle.
I'm still improving in some ways, although getting older, some things get harder. The reading glasses get a little bit stronger.
But he says living has been well worth the fight.
You think about what's important to you.
It's been amazing what he's been able to overcome for what the catastrophic injuries he endured, the surgeries and the pain. He's never displayed bitterness about, what happened.
And while the memory of that fateful November day 10 years ago will never completely fade, Officer Blood says he's only looking forward.
I want to see my granddaughter get big, maybe have another grandson, get away and enjoy life.
For Edina 16, I'm Marty Dahl.
Since his shooting, Officer Blood has become an active supporter of a number of area blood centers, as well as the Musculoskeletal Transplant Foundation. He credits the 120 pints of blood and the bone donation he received for saving his life and his leg. In each episode of Beyond the Badge, we take an in-depth look at different ways viewers can protect themselves from crime. This month, we're reminding you of ways to keep your home safe while you are traveling. With many people traveling to see family and friends during the holidays, we want to remind you of ways to keep your property safe from residential burglars. Before leaving on a trip, try to make your home look occupied. Ask a trusted neighbor to check your home for anything unusual, and occasionally park a vehicle in your driveway or in front of your home. Make arrangements for someone to shovel your driveway. Stop your mail and newspaper delivery or have someone collect them for you. Put a lamp and a radio in several locations in your home and use timers to set them to turn on at different times of the day. Turn your telephone ringer to low or turn it off. A loud ringing telephone is a sure sign no one is home. Finally, make sure all doors and windows are locked. When people think of fingerprinting, they often think of black ink and fingers rolled on cardstock. Did you know that ink isn't even used in modern-day fingerprinting? Let's go out in the field where Aaron White is with Community Service Officer Chris Hirsch, who will demonstrate how modern-day fingerprints are taken as part of a new segment we like to call How's It Work?
Thanks, Brian. We're in the Edina City Jail today for another segment of How's It Work, to look a little bit at some of the technology we use here at the police department. And in this case, how the technology has evolved. I'm joined by Chris Hirsch, a community service officer with the police department. Thanks for being here.
Not a problem.
And Chris, I'm holding in my hands a traditional fingerprint board or what have you. We got the dirty black ink here, the card. You would traditionally get my fingers all inky and roll them on there and make quite a mess and hopefully have good results the first time, right?
That's correct.
This process has evolved, and can you show us a little bit about how we do this now?
Yeah. As you can see right now, we already got it kind of set up. I have the information typed in of the subject, all their name, date of birth, that stuff. And right now it's prompting me to go ahead and take a fingerprint of the left index finger, so I can start with your left
and no ink this time. You're
no
not
ink.
Get me all
not,
covered
nope, this is
all right.
basically just what you
Do
came
your
in
worst.
with. And go ahead and see if it shows up on the screen. The machine will capture it, and it'll tell me if it's a good print or not. It tells me it confirms. So in this case, it's asking for a little bit better score. It says 62. It says requesting more pressure. So I use this wet wipe here to get the finger just a little wet. It's no ink, it's just like using water.
All right.
And then I will go ahead and rescan it, and then see how it comes up a little
That
better.
looks good.
And it tells me to capture, it processes it, and it tells me the next fingerprint. That means it accepted it. Now it's on to the next finger. It's asking for the right index now.
Pretty quick, straightforward process, less ink and more accuracy.
Correct.
Okay. What are the circumstances in which you do this? Obviously criminal bookings, but you guys also offer it as a service to the public.
Correct. If you're a citizen of Edina, we would be doing fingerprints. We do them on Wednesdays typically, but call ahead to the station, the non-emergency line, to make sure that it is still on for that day. But like I said, it's usually on Wednesdays around between 6 and 7 o'clock. So
Okay,
about an hour.
but call ahead.
Call ahead.
All right.
And then we will get your fingerprint done. We'll get the cards done here, and it's about $15 per card. And then that way we will get you your card and get you signed off and do where you need to go with it.
Okay, and you print cards just like the traditional cards
Right.
that can be submitted.
Yep. This machine prints it on a printer computer scanner type instead of doing ink. So it would actually be dry, ready to go, and you can put it right back in the folder and mail it out that day versus having to let it dry on those old machines.
Well, thanks, Chris. A little bit more efficient process, a cleaner process, and something that's clearly evolved as technology has advanced here at the police department. Appreciate you showing us how this works today. Chris Hirsch is a community service officer with the police department, and we'll return to Brian in the studio.
In addition to helping with fingerprinting, community service officers like Chris work closely with Edina's animal control officer, Tim Hunter. In addition to responding to animal-related calls, they remind residents that dog licenses expire at the end of each calendar year. All dogs 6 months and older residing in Edina must have a license permanently affixed to their collars. Cats do not have to be licensed. Rabies vaccinations are required on all dogs and cats 6 months and older. Dogs are required to wear vaccination tags at all times.
The importance to have your dog license is tied to the actual license itself. Every license for each dog has a unique number that's tied to that particular dog. Makes it easier for us to return the dog a lot faster should it become lost and turned into animal control.
A license costs $10 per neutered or spayed dog and $15 for dogs that are not neutered or spayed. Duplicate tags cost $6. Licenses can be renewed at Edina City Hall, through the mail, or online. To renew by mail, send current rabies information and a check for the licensing fee to Edina City Hall at the address on your screen. The Edina Police Department is part of a number of special task forces that help thwart crime in the Twin Cities. One such group is the Minnesota Financial Crimes Task Force. This task force was established in response to retailers, bankers, other businesses, and law enforcement's need to combat cross-jurisdictional financial crime. Let's go back to Officer Aaron White, who is with Commander Patrick Henry to tell us more.
Thanks, Brian. I'm joined by Patrick Henry, who's the commander of the Minnesota Financial Crimes Task Force, to learn a little bit about what his organization does. Pat, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me.
And I guess that's my opening question for you. Just fill us in. What exactly is it that the Minnesota Financial Crimes Task Force does?
Well, the task force, Aaron, investigates financial crimes that are normally related to identity theft. Okay. Not always, but the whole conglomeration of counterfeit checks, counterfeit credit cards, embezzlement, anything that has to do with financial crime.
Okay, and you have a statewide reach and focus, really, or a broader than an individual agency might have in that area.
That's correct. It was intentionally designed so that we would have a statewide focus with investigators outside the metropolitan area.
As commander, you're in charge of the organization.
That's
What
correct.
is your background? What brought you to this?
I have approximately 25 years in federal law enforcement as a special agent with the Internal Revenue Service.
And the reason we're talking about all this, of course, is Edina plays an integral role in this. What is Edina Police Department's involvement?
Well, Edina has a multifaceted role in this. And in fact, your Chief of Police, Jeff Long, is the chairman of the Advisory Council. Okay. And you have an investigator that's been assigned to the task force for a number of years.
And how do you guys interact with the cases and enforcement efforts of the police department here in Edina?
Well, we relate to the task force, we relate to Edina PD in the fact that your investigator not only investigates crimes that occur under the jurisdiction of the task force, but also financial crimes that occur in Edina.
Sure.
It kind of couples itself together.
In the electronic age, the prevalence of the internet and everybody's lives and those things, are you seeing an increase in these types of crimes?
Yes, to put it in its most simple.
Sure. What are some of the most common things that you're seeing currently in your workload?
There's a broad base of just crimes that have always occurred: counterfeit money, counterfeit checks, counterfeit credit cards, the scams of basically breaking into cars, stealing identities,
sure,
which are then sold to other people. These groups that we're investigating are usually organized from a top strategy level of supervisory type of thing to runners on the streets.
So this isn't just a single petty thief out on the streets. You're talking about organized groups, and that's really a focus of what you're after.
That's correct. We prefer to look at the organization in its entirety, and just like in a narcotics investigation, you go from the bottom and work yourself up to the top, the people that really control that organization.
Sure. One of the things we try to do with our show here is let viewers know tips, ways to avoid becoming victims. And even though you're talking kind of a higher level, that organized crime type level, it really does come back down to victims, individuals who are being exposed to this criminal activity. Do you have a tip? Do you have some things that people are doing out there that's causing you some
Hide
extra
your
work?
purse in the trunk of your car when you leave it. Don't give your identity or any of your identifying information to anybody unless you absolutely know for certain who you're giving it to.
Sure. Okay, so protect those things. Don't leave those purses in the cars and all that kind of stuff. Finally, Pat, how about some success stories? What are some of the things you guys are proud of here in the last few months?
Well, there's more than a few, but I'll mention a couple just because they involve your Edina investigator.
Sure.
Well, it involved a bank transfer of a large amount of money from a bank outside the Twin Cities area. It became suspicious when a wire transfer came into a local bank and was immediately transferred to a secondary bank, and then individuals came into that bank and tried to withdraw those funds. And it was determined that the source of that transfer was indeed a counterfeit check.
And what type of dollar amount are we talking about in a crime like that?
Well, most of these crimes, that was in the amount of $100,000.
Okay, so these aren't, again, your petty thieves at work. This is the work of very large organized crime groups.
That's correct.
Well, Pat, thanks for being here today and sharing a little background and explanation of what it is you do at the Minnesota Financial Crimes Task Force. We appreciate your time.
You're very welcome, Aaron. Thank you.
Patrick Henry, commander of the Minnesota Financial Crimes Task Force, and we'll return to Brian in the studio.
Edina's many shopping areas are at their busiest around the holidays, and sometimes it is difficult to find a good place to park. One member of the Edina Police Department works hard to make sure parking is as convenient as possible in downtown Edina. Browder Stone is the police department's parking attendant at 50th and France. He monitors vehicles parked in the city's lot and 3 parking ramps to make sure that they do not stay in the spots longer than the 2 hours posted in most areas. This helps ensure that the spots will turn over and that drivers can always find a place to park in the area.
We see a significant increase in vehicle traffic at 50th and France during the holiday time. And I'd like to remind all the customers to please pay attention to the signage. There are 1-hour stalls, there are 2-hour stalls, and then if they're going to be here for, say, a movie and dinner, we'd like them to park in the 5-hour stalls.
Stone also works closely with the 50th and France Business and Professional Association to make sure that employees of Edina's businesses have parking permits and park in the spots designated for 5-hour or longer parking in the ramps. Through the end of the year, some of the spots designated for permit parking will also be used by a valet company hired by 50th and France restaurants. Through December 31st, diners and shoppers can leave their cars with the valet at a spot between Salou and Edina Grill.
The valet service is being done through the holiday season this year and in efforts to help with the parking and to alleviate some of the issues that we've had in the ramp. Because there's so many shoppers down here, sometimes it does get a little packed in the ramps.
Hours of the trial valet service are 11:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. and 4:45 p.m. to 11 p.m. daily. On behalf of my co-host, Officer Aaron White, and the rest of the officers of the Edina Police Department, thanks for tuning in to learn a little bit more of what goes on beyond the badge. Have a safe and happy holiday season.
Beyond the Badge is brought to you by Jerry's Foods, Jerry's Hardware, and the Edina Crime Prevention Fund.